Good evening and welcome to California Today. I'm Bill Thomas, and here's a preview of some of today's stories. San Francisco's non-citizen voting proposition is being challenged in the courts again. An attorney recently filed an amicus brief stating the city ordinance is unconstitutional. We have an update to the San Francisco city proposition that allows non-citizens, including undocumented immigrants, to vote for school board candidates. NTD's David Zhang interviewed the attorney who recently filed an amicus brief challenging the city ordinance.
Currently, non-citizens, including undocumented immigrants, can vote for school board candidates in San Francisco. This comes from Proposition N, passed by San Francisco voters in 2016. A year ago, Proposition N was challenged in court, and in last July, a judge ruled that Proposition N was not constitutional and issued an injunction. But the San Francisco city attorney then appealed the case and received a stay on the injunction, which allowed non-citizens to go ahead to vote last November. Alexander Haberbush, a constitutional attorney who recently filed an amicus brief challenging the city's ordinance, explains the constitutionality of this proposition. So, Alexander, did non-citizens in San Francisco get a special ballot for last November's midterm election? Does the state or county have a way to verify that every other box is left blank? Because obviously on the same ballot, there are candidates running for judges, district attorneys, public defenders in U.S. Congress, and other city measures. And if you say non-citizens are only allowed to vote for school board candidates, and if they check other boxes on the same ballot, would it have broken the election laws?
That's correct. So if they do check a box other than school board, that is a violation of the law. Unfortunately, there's virtually no way for San Francisco to verify that that hasn't happened. Because as soon as a ballot is put into the system, as soon as that ballot is processed, we have a secret ballot in every state in this country. You can't tie that ballot back to the person who originally voted it. So even if it's illegal, it's essentially unenforceable. There's no way to make sure they're only voting in those school board elections. Now, the text of the proposition that San Francisco voted on is very, very bare bones. Text just says the city shall allow a non-citizen resident of San Francisco who is of legal voting age and a parent, legal guardian, or legally recognized caregiver of a child living in the San Francisco Unified School District to vote for members of the Board of Education. So, we don't know if that's going to be applied in a manner that opens up opportunities for electoral irregularity or not.
Well, one argument we have heard a lot is that all students, regardless of immigration status, have equal access to an education under the laws of the United States. If that's the case, their parents should have a voice, regardless of their citizenship status, to participate in school board elections. What's your take on the argument? Yeah,
so I think you have to look at the definition of citizenship as specified in our Constitution. So the United States Constitution in the 14th Amendment defines citizenship as all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. So that important phrase there is going to be subject to the jurisdiction thereof. What does that mean? Well, it means the full jurisdiction of the United States, not just that you'll be arrested for murder, if you commit a murder, but that you have every part of the United States laws apply to you. So historically, voting has been a right that is associated with citizens of the United States. There are many stakeholders, and have always been many stakeholders in this country who certainly have a stake in the outcome of our laws. A non-citizen who gets tried for a crime in this country has a stake in the outcome of that trial. We don't allow that person to vote because being a stakeholder is not the traditional measuring stick for what allows a person to vote. Citizenship is. It's more akin to, I think, a shareholder when you're a citizen. And as we know, in companies, shareholders are the people who vote. In the United States, shareholders are citizens. So we think it makes sense for citizens to be the ones who vote. Importantly, that's actually enshrined directly in law in the California State Constitution, which in Article 2 says that a United States citizen 18 years of age and a resident of this state may vote. Very clear. It's explicit that it only applies to citizens of the state of California. And the idea that voting is something reserved to citizens is not a controversial concept. other side claims they can point to historical instances where voting has been extended to non-citizens, but even Jerry Brown, the former governor of California, very recently said that jury service, like voting, is quintessentially a prerogative and responsibility of the citizenship. This was not a controversial statement when he said it, and it shouldn't be controversial now.
Now, when it comes to kids going through sex transitioning or getting abortions, the current trend seems to keep parents out of the picture. But here's the city of San Francisco advocating for parental rights to vote. Is this Proposition N really about empowering parents?
Yeah, I think that cities like San Francisco have been very clear they don't care a great deal about parental rights, except for when it benefits some kind of electoral outcome, as it does here. There is a well-enshrined and legally protected doctrine in this country. It comes from the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, and part of that equality that our law guarantees is that one person has one vote. And whenever any election case has been examined by the Supreme Court, they always look at population in terms of citizen voting population, not in terms of overall demographic population. And the reason for that is that when you necessarily, if you allow more people to get into the voter pool, you dilute the votes of those who are already there. So by allowing non-citizens to vote, they are necessarily diluting the votes of voters who are already in San Francisco. And in particular, what my brief focuses on in this case is it dilutes the votes of black citizens, who represent only about 5% of San Francisco's population, and whose votes would count for essentially nothing if we allow all the non-citizens of San Francisco to vote in school board elections.
You're talking about this amicus brief you filed on March 8th. What are some other key takeaways from this brief?
Yeah, I think a lot of what's been ignored in the discussion about voter rights and whether or not non-citizens should vote is the effect that necessarily has on people who are already voters within San Francisco. Every new vote, and particularly if it's a new vote from somebody who is not a shareholder, not a citizen of the United States, dilutes the votes of people who are already there. There has been a history of voter discrimination and voter disenfranchisement for black citizens in this country, and we think this is just one more step in that direction. And, significantly, David, this is not the only city that has engaged in this kind of vote dilution and disenfranchisement of citizens. We've seen this all throughout the country. I think there's about 10 cities in Maryland that have already done this, a couple cities in Vermont that have also allowed non-citizen voting. And in every case, what we see is a disenfranchisement of black voters in those cities.
Do you think this case could eventually go to the California Supreme Court?
I don't see how we can avoid that. The government's made it very, very clear. The city of San Francisco has been very, very clear that they're going to oppose any effort to stop their attempt to enfranchise non-citizens to vote. In my opinion, the fact that they appealed this to the Court of Appeals was a frivolous lawsuit. They should have accepted the ruling of the lower court. As I mentioned, the California Constitution is very, very clear on this point. Couldn't be clearer that citizens are people that have the vote. But I think the city of San Francisco is determined to have their way on this. I would not be at all surprised if they appeal this to the California Supreme Court.
What is your projection on the timeline? If this injunction stay order is still in effect in 2024 next year, that means the San Francisco non-citizens can vote again.
We do hope to prevent that before that time comes. As you know, the courts are very slow, and we're subject to the discretion of the courts on the timetable for briefing on all these things. So my suspicion is the city of San Francisco will do what they can to drag out briefing because they want to allow this law to stand as long as they possibly can, but that's what we're fighting.
All right, Alexander Haberbush, president of Lex Rex Institute, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.